Hello, everybody. This is your first installment of the NFA 121 lectures. We will start with chapter 1, which is titled Food for Today. And what this chapter is basically doing is a brief overview of why we choose the foods that we choose based on several different factors and who we would go to find out evidence-based information about the foods that we choose. Now, we will do an activity in class based on this chapter, and if you've had NFA 201, which is our basic nutrition class, a lot of this in chapter 1 and 2 will be redundant, so bear with me on that. So the main kind of idea or thought that you're going to hear a lot in this chapter or see in this chapter is, are you eating to live or living to eat? And you may have heard that before because a lot of people, their whole life revolves around when their next meal will be or where it will be or what they will have, but others are, food is kind of secondary. They don't think about it until they're absolutely starved to death and then they think, oh, I should probably eat. So there are several food patterns, and some of these, again, you've talked about in NFA 201, but why we choose the foods that we choose, is it based on our lifestyle? Are we rich or are we poor? Are we working 3 jobs and going to class? Or are we, just footloose and fancy freak? That influences what we're going to eat. Money, again, do we buy things on sale? Do we go to certain grocery stores because the food is cheaper? And what our budget is, I like to buy milk that's the cheapest because we go through so much of it. Or maybe you only have $100 a week to spend on groceries, and so that's what you get, and you find a way to make that $100 stretch. You may have a health issue. You may have diabetes, and so you need to be very careful to choose foods that are lower in carbohydrates. Or you may have heart disease, and you want something with lower fat content. Overall nutrition. So some of you are nutrition savvy, and you really know, the types of foods that you want and what's better for you, and you want to prevent chronic disease. And so you'll make decisions based on what you think is the most nutritious food that's available. Food safety, I don't know if a lot of you think about this because sometimes we don't, but you may have heard on the news foods that have been recalled several years ago. For example, peanut butter was recalled, and so everybody was scared to eat Peter Pan peanut butter. So maybe you're making choices based on, foods and how safe those foods are and how, they can stay safe when you buy them and take them home. And then you have your individual food preferences. I really can't stand raisins. I won't eat anything with raisins in it. You may love raisins, and you may say, oh, I could eat any raisin anywhere. And then family eating patterns. And this one I think is super cool. This is probably one of my favorite things to look at and research and ask people about. But do you eat this the way that you eat because that's the way your family's always done it? Or that's what I always, eat after dinner or drink with my dinner. So that to me is super cool. I love that stuff. There are different dining venues, and what that basically means is where people eat, okay? So you may eat at home or in your dorm room. Of course, in the United States, foods cooked at home and eaten in the home has declined significantly. So we don't do that as much as we used to. But it's a great way for family members to get together, to coordinate, to catch up. And they actually, have a lot of research to support families sitting down together and eating a meal together. There's home cooking where you cook the foods right there. It may be out of a box, but you have prepared it yourself. Or you may have, and this has become really, really popular, you may go by Kroger or Walmart or Meijer, and you may get something like a rotisserie chicken and a pre-made salad or a pre-made side dish, and you may take it home, either reheat it or it's still the right temperature, and you may eat it. So there are kind of different ways that you would eat meals at home. Meals away from home is what you would expect. Restaurants, cookouts. It can be, excuse me, it can be things like going to friends' houses can be included in your meals away from home as well. You have fast food, Self-explanatory. Most of you know what fast food is. You have some institutional type settings. So those of you who are eating here at the campus PAL or downstairs PAL or any of the other facilities here on campus. Or, some people have, based on their jobs, have to eat in hospitals. I multiple times when I worked in the hospital didn't want to bring my lunch, and so I would eat the hospital food. And it has improved. It's not as bad as it used to be, that's for sure. And then, of course, there's the sit-down restaurants where the meal is supposedly prepared more closely to scratch, and you kind of have a different type of food than the fast foods. Now, reasons why we choose foods. And there's lots of reasons why we make choices. And again, this is something that really, really interests me. But there's lots of factors that contribute to it, and they kind of interplay and jump on top of each other. It's not just one of these factors by itself. It's all of these factors working together in each person. The ethnic heritage one is what we will cover throughout the semester. And remember that each of your groups is assigned a specific ethnic region to research that heritage and what is going on in that area, what foods are most common, how do they cook the foods that may be different than other areas, because where you grew up and your culture will truly influence what you eat and how you eat it, and actually even how you serve the food. Different types of resources, how much time do you have to cook food? And do you have, every single type of kitchen equipment known to mankind so that you can cook just about anything, anyway, anyhow? And do you have the money to do that? Do you have the money to buy the duck versus the chicken? Okay, so those types of resources. Again, personal preferences pops up. And what's really cool about personal preferences is that we basically train each other. I mean, our parents have trained us as to what foods we like and don't like because they may or may not have introduced something. Or we could have gotten it genetically, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. And then, of course, health will influence our food choices, and we've talked about that also. So let's talk a little bit about palatability. And what this basically means is how acceptable the food is in our mouths, and the taste, the texture, the color, all of those things, how it kind of works in our mouth once we eat this food. Aroma is how our nose perceives the food. So if you've ever opened an orange up or peeled an orange and you've smelled that, or you're cooking steak on the grill and that smell that you get in, you smell all those juices and all the seasonings all mixed together, that's an aroma. It has to do with smells. Taste, on the other hand, is a combination of multiple factors that sends a message about the food to your brain. Okay, so it's sending that chemical smell through the food to your brain. And then we have something called flavor, which is a little bit different because flavor is actually a combination of taste and smell. So if you've ever, held your nose while you took your medicine so that you didn't taste the nasty medicine, or had a really bad cold and you couldn't smell anything because your nose is all stopped up, have you noticed that the food has like no flavor whatsoever? That's because you can't taste if you can't smell. So it kind of works together, aroma and taste work together to give you the flavor of the food. And color. Color is super important when we're talking about food. Because if the food does not look good, people don't want to eat it. I mean, if you go into PAL and the food is a brown, dead color, nobody's going to eat that. Or if you've got a plate in front of you that's got white chicken and white mashed potatoes and white gravy, that doesn't even look appetizing. So color actually entices us and helps us to want the food more. And then finally, we have texture. How does that food feel? Is it crunchy? Is it smooth? Is it grainy? Is it chunky? All those things you kind of think about when you're eating the foods, and some of you may not like certain textures. You may say, no, I'm not doing this texture at all. I can't stand it. That is a texture issue, and some people have it, and that's perfectly fine. all of these factors together create an appearance or a presentation that's pleasing. All right, so if you're trying to get somebody to eat more, if I had a cancer patient that just did not want to eat because, their appetite was bad, they didn't feel good, one of the most important things is just to make food look good to them. And sometimes just that little bit of, of color or texture or different types of smells that come off that plate will make that person want to eat a little bit better. So the appearance or the presentation of food is really important to entice you to eat it. And this is hard to see because my screen is larger, but when we were talking about tastes, there are 4 major tastes, and then there's a 5th one that we also need to discuss. But this picture kind of gives you an idea of where those taste buds are located on the tongue. So you've probably heard of these: bitter, sour, sweet, and salty. Bitter flavors typically are caught on the tongue in the back of the tongue. Sour flavors are mostly on the sides. Those are the ones that make you kind of pucker up when you have it. Sweet is mostly in the tip of the tongue, although it's pretty spread around throughout the mouth. And then so is salty. Again, mostly on the outside edges, but it can be distributed throughout. So don't think of this middle portion, even though this picture kind of is deceiving, as being completely a blank slate. What's really in this area where there's all of the white is a mixture of all of them, and they're not as strong and they're not as numerous as they would be in the colored sections that you see here. So one of the things that we're going to do within our class activity is we're going to do a sensory evaluation. And what that basically means is we're going to try a food and we're going to individually identify the aroma, the taste, and the texture of that food. And we're going to take note of that. So all of those factors will be written down on a piece of paper, and you'll decide based on what you've gotten. Is it bitter? Is it salty? Is it sour? Is it sweet? And then the 5th one that I have yet to mention now is a taste called umami. U-M-A-M-I. And this is a savory quality, and what it's really kind of like is if you've ever eaten Chinese or Indian food and you eat it and it kind of feels like you can smell it while you're eating it. It kind of adds this huge, I kind of liken it to like a taste bomb went off in your mouth, because when you put it in your mouth, it seems to fill your whole mouth with this flavor and this smell. And that's called umami. And there will be one food item that you will try in class that will be a umami flavor, and I'm hoping you can catch it and figure out which one it is. And then we'll also look at vision and touch. How many times have you picked up a food and it's like sticky, or it's slimy, or it's rough and coarse? So we'll do those subjective evaluations in class. And we'll take note of color and texture as well. Now there are some, when they are places like McDonald's or Kellogg's or any sort of food company is trying to figure out what foods to put on the market, they will do these sensory evaluations. They'll have a focus group come in, and this focus group will sit down and they'll rate the new food item based on the aroma, the taste, the flavor, what it looks like, its texture, and they'll give it ratings. So that Smiley scale, and it's on page 10 in your textbook, is an example of that. They'll say they either like it or they hate it, and that kind of drives what ends up on the market out there. And as a side note, there are over 80,000 different types of food on the market. That's insane. Just insane. And here's an example of a hedonic scale where you pick from like to hate, basically. And so this is what we're going to be doing in class. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it here because I'm going to print this off for you. But basically, you're going to be sampling, and then you're going to be making note of what you've tasted. Briefly, the objective evaluation is like this, only it uses more scientific measures. So it typically will have some sort of weight or a scale to measure the food, and they'll put it, very scientific terms on what this food item looks like. They'll break it down chemically to see what's in it. This is very technical. This is not something that we're going to do in class, but it is another way to judge the food and rate the food. But again, sensory is what we're going to do in class.